Two longtime political rivals come together to agree on a dramatic change to Michigan's role in national elections. Ford ups the ante and the commitment to electrification. Why isn't Michigan a bigger part of it? And Detroit homecoming again brings the expats back. Today is Sunday, October 3rd, 2021, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. Hope your first October weekend has been a good one so far. We've got a lot to get to today. If you're a longtime watcher of Flashpoint, you know I've long been bullish on electric vehicles. I started with the Chevy Volt. I've now gone all electric with the Mustang Mach-E, and Ford is clearly going all electric too. Along with the Mach-E, they've got all those orders for the F-150 Lightning, and this week they announced an $11 billion investment in electrification. It is breathtaking in scope, with massive plants planned for Tennessee and Kentucky, but Michiganders couldn't help but notice their absence from the plant maps. Now, Ford is clearly committed to its hometown. The changes at the train station in Corktown testimony to that. But what happened here? The governor says Michigan wasn't given a chance to get into the race. Well, what does that mean? Ahead, we'll talk about the many ramifications of the announcement. We're also going to check in on what this year's Detroit homecoming proceedings meant as the city tries to strengthen the ties that bind expats to Motown. But up first, the push to get Michigan to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. In just about any other election, the person with the most votes wins. It's that simple. Not really so with the American presidency, which relies on the Electoral College. Should we change it, or did our founding fathers have it right? It's all today on Flashpoint.
Well, 5 times in American history, the winner of the popular vote in the presidential race has not gone on to become president. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, and it's probably hard to get people in a wad about Rutherford B. Hayes or John Quincy Adams, but it's happened twice, obviously, in recent elections. And a lot of people have been taking a new look at the Electoral College system, and that includes 2 guys who have long been political rivals on opposite sides of issues. And I think it's noteworthy that they've come together in agreement on this one. And we've got both of them as our guests here to start things off today. Saul Anuzis, the former Republican chair in the state of Michigan, and Mark Brewer, the former Democratic chair. Guys, I really appreciate the time. Mark, let me start with you because I think that there's a lot of people that say, well, of course the Democrats are upset about the way things have gone. How do you dissuade them that this isn't just your own partisan issue?
Well, I think for the reason you indicated, you look at the history here, and this has affected both parties over the course of time. And I think it really offends our modern notion of majority vote and one person, one vote. That in every other election in this country, Devin, the person who gets the most votes wins. The only exception, the presidency. And Saul and I think that it's time for that to change. That whoever gets the majority votes nationwide becomes president. We cut through all this stuff about recounts and litigation and fighting and make it a simple majority vote election.
Now, Saul, I can't imagine how many texts and phone calls you've gotten from fellow Republicans who feel like you've completely burned down the house with this with this support. This is actually something, though, that you have been favoring for a long time, long before, say, the 2016 election, right?
Yeah, I had. I actually came out in favor of this in 2008. After Michigan was a battleground state when John McCain was campaigning here. And then next thing you know, on October 19th, we're not a battleground state. And I was very frustrated with the idea that, one day you can be relevant and people are paying attention to you and the next day you're irrelevant. And as Mark mentioned, I think the driving factor for me is I want to make sure that during presidential elections, every voter in every state is politically relevant. I think it's crazy when you take a look at the system we have today where 4 out of 5 Americans live in a state that's either decidedly Republican or decidedly Democrat, which basically means they're ignored in presidential elections. And we have a little pool of 10 to 12 states that are potential battleground states. And oftentimes we get down to 3 or 4 states that make a difference. And so the practical effect of that is we elect the president of the battleground states of America versus the president of the United States of America. And I think what Mark and I are saying as we campaigned, both in Michigan and around the country as chairs and members of our respective national committees, it's important that, presidential candidates campaign in all 50 states, that we have parties in all 50 states, and that the country as a whole participates in electing the one office actually does represent all 50 states plus the District of Columbia.
Mark, it wasn't as if, though, that this didn't dawn on our founding fathers as they were cobbling together the Constitution. I look at the Electoral College much as the way that I look at the way that they created the Senate, was to make sure that smaller states, places with that might otherwise not have a lot of influence, would be protected. How do you feel about sort of rolling up on our founding fathers, which is anathema to certainly a lot of Americans?
Well, it's not rolling up at all for at least two reasons, Devin. First of all, we don't change the Electoral College. It's there. This is not an amendment to the Constitution. The second thing is that I think this really honors the founding fathers who believed in federalism, and they believed it should be up to the states to decide how they choose their electors. And so here we are now over 2 centuries later, and we're a democracy that has evolved strongly in favor of majority rule, strongly in favor of one person, one vote. And what Saul and I are advocating allows each state to decide to elect their electors that way. So I think it does honor the founders by honoring the system they created.
That system, Saul, also, though, as Mark just pointed out, allows states to select their electors. It also allows states to decide how those electoral votes are to be divvied up. Why isn't it a better idea to go along with what Maine and Nebraska do, which is an apportioned dispensement of those electoral votes instead of all winner take all?
Right. I mean, they apportion them based on congressional district. And the problem is that they make the current system, they take the current system and make it a little bit worse. Today, we have 3 to 5 to 10 battleground states. And if you look at congressional seats, there's 30 to 40 competitive congressional seats out of 435. So instead of concentrating in 3 to 5 states, you're going to concentrate in 10 to 12 to 15 congressional districts, creating the similar situation where only a small group of voters really get to decide who the president of the United States is. And I think the beauty of what Mark was talking about, the founders wanted states to act in their selfish best interest. And you have to go back to the 19th century here, basically, as we moved into the 19th century, we literally had 40, 45 competitive states where presidential candidates did campaign in all 50 states. But the reality is the last time any candidate campaigned in all 50 states was Richard Nixon in the 1960s. And even then, he probably shouldn't have done it because we only had maybe 30, 35 competitive states, but he promised the American people he'd do it. So this is really about changing how we choose our electors, state by state. States are acting in their selfish best interest to make sure they're always relevant. Michigan is a very unique situation. Sometimes we're a battleground state, sometimes we're not. Yeah. And we can feel it both times. And so we want to make sure that we're always a battleground state. And by having a national popular vote where every vote in Michigan matters, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, campaigns are going to have to pay attention to the issues that affect our state, to the politicians who are our leaders at the time. And I think that's exactly what the founders had in mind.
Well, Saul, though, what do you say to your fellow Republicans who say, from a purely a point of self-interest and of political expediency, you would have changed, this would have changed, Donald Trump wouldn't have been president, and nor would George Bush. How do you handle that argument then?
Well, the reality is that we have never campaigned for a national popular vote. So we really don't know exactly how that would go. You play by the rules that were given to you. And if you go back to 1988, presidential campaigns have spent 95 to 90% of all their resources post-general elections in 10 states or less. So you really haven't run a national popular vote. But, this is where Mark and I probably disagree. I believe it's a center-right nation. I believe more people share our values than theirs. And therefore, I'm very comfortable of having Republicans take their message to the American people. And I think we're going to have a fair shot at winning. Not to put words in Mark's mouth, but I believe he believes the opposite is true, and he's willing to take that shot. What is unique about this position, though, it is quintessentially fair. Both of us have the opportunity to go to the American people, have our candidate, be he or she, make their best case to the American people, and let the best person win. I mean, we literally elect 514,000 other elected officials that way, except for the one that represents the country as a whole. And it causes all kinds of problems, both political and from a policy perspective.
Mark, I'm about to run out of time, but I want to let you take a shot at what you would say to Republicans who, I don't know how much sway you would have with Republicans to begin with, but what would you say to them to make the case that this isn't just Democrats trying to figure out a way to put the fix in?
Well, I would even say this to my own party, Devin, that look, things change. Michigan was not a battleground state for decades and decades and decades. This system would have ensured that candidates still campaign here. So things change. This is a long-run, fair system for both parties that levels the playing field and gives every party, every election, a chance to win. I think that's the message to all partisans.
Well, it's a fascinating debate, which makes it perfect for Flashpoint. And I know you guys now will get the petitions going. We'll see where it goes. Thanks so much for the time, and I know we'll talk about it again soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. We'll continue with Flashpoint in just a moment. We'll talk about Ford's big bet on electrification. Back with more in just a minute.
5 seconds is the average time your eyes are off the road while texting. Farm Bureau insurance agents across Michigan are offering thumb bands as a reminder to keep your fingers off the phone and attention on the road. Distracted driving is not worth it.
I've been on the road too long. I just have to sing this song. I'm coming home to the place where I belong. Detroit City. This Detroit's strong, and we are strong. The heart and soul of the city are the people, don't you know? From the corner hot dog vendor to musicians who can throw. And we're much, much more than that. You can watch it on the news. From the shores of our great city to the towns we love to cruise. We are Detroit. We are Detroit. How sweet the sound, and we are strong. How sweet the sound. Strong. We are Detroit. We are Detroit. And we are strong.
The new All for Pets spokespets have been crowned. Introducing Dexter and his little brother Alfred. Even though they weren't made in Michigan, their brotherhood was. Check out their story on All for Pets on Click on Detroit, social media, and of course, Local 4.
When local schools are already short-staffed, just one worker calling in sick can start a chain reaction.
Or we have a transportation person that is sick, a bus driver. We don't have any subs in that space, so that route is canceled.
Bus drivers, custodians, food workers, and more.
Because they don't have bus drivers and stuff like that. That's why I'm dropping them off. Make sure you get to school. Sometimes they don't come.
How this domino effect can completely derail your day. Monday morning at 6:30 on Local 4 News Today.
All right, let's now talk about the announcement from Ford. More than $11 billion going toward electrification. Huge news. Not as great as it could have been if you're a Michigan business leader or Michigan politician. Let's talk about it all with Michelle Krebs, the executive analyst for Cox Automotive, and Henry Payne, the auto critic for the Detroit News. Michelle, let me start with you with the meat of this announcement. Put this in perspective for me. How big is this bet that Ford is making?
It's a big bet, and everybody's making these big bets. So Ford announced it was doing two manufacturing complexes, one in Tennessee, one in Kentucky. They will include manufacturing, but also manufacturing of the battery, which is very significant. It will amount to about 11,000 jobs, and it's $11 billion between Ford and its battery partner, SK Innovation. It's a big deal.
And very important in this is this idea that they want to control more of their own supply chain, correct? I mean, we've learned some lessons here.
Absolutely. If we didn't learn anything from the chip shortage, we learned it because the battery production is the key to this. And, we got stuck without having our own chip production.
Yeah. Henry, I mentioned off top of the program the way that I've talked quite a bit about the way I feel about electrification. And you are like-minded. You were an early adopter of the Tesla. In fact, I think you've been out running around in the electric Hummer lately, which has a lot of people excited. But I think there's a lot of people that are very concerned yet that business is running ahead of the appetite of the public for this. Now, to be a smart business, I guess you have to be ahead of the curve. But are we properly aligned yet?
No, EVs right now are very much a niche vehicle, and it's interesting with the Ford announcement. You look at what they're building down there in Tennessee. They're building trucks. I think the manufacturers have really identified the two sectors that they can get a foothold in are luxury vehicles like I drive a Tesla Model 3, motorheads like me who've got a little coin and love to go fast. And then you look at look at the truck segment. I mean, electrification has enormous benefits for trucks in terms of low-end torque, in terms of saving costs for commercial truck makers. So I think it's very significant that what Ford is building down there is Tennessee. And it's not, I think, Dylan, Devin, what we're talking about here is as much a commercial market as is a retail market. So you got a lot of corporations out there, big corporations that have sustainability goals, and that are going to be looking at pickup makers like Ford to fill their fleets.
Fleets is obviously a massive part of the story. Let's move to the Michigan part of this, Michelle. A lot of hand-wringing over why there wasn't a little bit more love coming from Ford for their home turf, and yet I think some people have explained that the availability, the sites that they were talking about in Kentucky and Ford were a little more Kentucky and Tennessee, just more shovel-ready, and Michigan wasn't ready to compete with that.
I don't know the politics of it. It's not my field, but they did acquire massive amounts of land. They got very significant incentives from the states. And Ford does have a plant in Louisville, which isn't very far from where one of the plants is. And there's an ample workforce. The other thing that I'm hearing that is an issue is the electricity costs, which are much less there.
Do we have any idea whether these are going to be UAW jobs down south?
We don't know that. That's yet to be seen, and that will be a battle.
Yeah. Henry, what's your take on this? It doesn't seem to be great PR, if nothing else, for Michigan trying to put its flag in the ground as being the future of the auto industry.
Well, but to build on what Michelle just said, two things about Tennessee, Kentucky. I mean, there's a huge circle of auto manufacturing down there. I was just at the VW plant in Chattanooga. You've got GM in Spring Hill. You have Nissan in south of Nashville. There are a lot of automakers down there, and the batteries are everybody likes to say that electric cars are low emission. There is huge energy costs in manufacturing batteries. You got cheap coal power in Kentucky. You have cheap hydro power and nuclear power in Tennessee. That's going to help keep down the costs for these automakers as they build these electric vehicles.
It tells us a little bit about where maybe a roadmap then for Michigan for how it needs to compete. Michelle, quick thought about where we are on electric infrastructure then. It's still a big worry for a lot of consumers about whether or not and how they're going to charge their vehicle. And on the other end of it, what are we going to do with all these batteries? I haven't heard anybody really flesh that out for me yet.
Well, I can tell you that we bought a company that does recycling and evaluation of batteries, so we know where that will be a big business eventually. But the infrastructure is the first thing we really need. When we talk to consumers, what's the obstacle to keeping you from buying an electric vehicle? It's price and then range and infrastructure. If we had the infrastructure, range wouldn't be as big a problem because we are starting to address that. So we got to address that.
You got it. Michelle and Henry, always good to talk to both of you. I appreciate the expertise, and hopefully we'll see you again in person real soon.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Devin.
You bet. You too. Thanks so much. We come back, we'll talk about the latest edition of Detroit Homecoming. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
It's all around you. Keeping up with you on your journey. Working with providers to keep you healthy. And adding value to your life. HAP is here. And we've been right here all along. Wherever life takes you. See how HAP is here for you.
Jason Carr is a very wise soul.
Whether it's music or cars or peanut butter and jelly.
He is a walking Google.
We're both so nostalgic about things from our childhoods, which was a long time ago.
Oh, do you remember like this rock band from like 1984? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry.
You're like, yeah, these should be true. And then you Google it and you're like, yeah, he's right again.
He can just call up this information so quickly. It's really cool.
The Capuchin Soup Kitchen needs your help. For more than 90 years, inspired by the example of St. Francis of Assisi, the Capuchin Soup Kitchen has been privileged to serve people facing challenging circumstances. Today, the Capuchin Soup Kitchen has evolved to include programs like the Rosa Parks Children's and Youth Program, helping our local children through art and tutoring. We can't do this work without your help. Be a friend to the Capuchin Soup Kitchen and pledge your support today.
Thank you for being a friend to the Capuchin Soup Kitchen.
Local news is more important than ever. Get the very latest on developments in Metro Detroit on Local 4 News first at 4, then on Inside Edition.
School lunch crisis across the USA.
Before the pandemic, many schools used to make lunch in the cafeteria.
Now many schools even have to run to the supermarket to make sure the kids are fed. Then, Target, Tesla. Why so many electric cars are being vandalized.
I just was shocked.
Inside Edition, following Local 4 News first at 4, Monday.
Most recent edition of Detroit Homecoming wrapped up last weekend, and I think this is really fascinating as Motown and Crane's Detroit works to try to keep this connection going between those who've left the city, keep them connected with the things that are happening in the Motor City. Let's bring in Tess Mateo, Managing Director of CX Catalyst, which develops public-private partnerships and things like clean energy and infrastructure and much more. Now lives in New York, but has attended all 8 years of Detroit Homecoming. And current Detroiter, Nicholas Rambus, is co-founder and CEO of Hush, which is a service dedicated to helping families control their financial security. Tess, let me start with you. As someone who has been to every one of these events, obviously these have obviously struck a chord for you that you keep coming back, but characterize this year's edition for me.
Well, post-COVID, it was really we weren't sure how everyone was going to come back because it was virtual last year. And it was really exciting. And it was I think the programming was a little bit more special than the last one because, one, we knew it's going to be a hybrid mix, but because we also were looking to do more on a social justice programming, and the programming is excellent every year. We had a fantastic tour by one of the historians, forgot his name, of the history of Black culture. As well as we had the electricity, which was an amazing exhibit. And
that's an extraordinary thing. Nicholas, I suppose there were worries that COVID might really knock this thing off its tracks a little bit, and kind of the year that we had to go completely virtual might really change it for the future. How did you feel about this year's edition?
It was fantastic. Of course, there were mitigations in place, but the attendance was there, the energy was there. Love to see the vibrance, right? That's still here. A lot of entrepreneurs who are envision building new businesses or investing in others. So, frankly, other than a little bit on the attendance, no difference, right? Lots of excitement about what's coming from Detroit.
Nicholas, that's actually really what I think. What I think this hopes to create is investment of all kinds, psychic, investment, keeping people connected to their hometown, but real investment too. Is it successful in that way?
It has been. There are hundreds of millions of dollars that have come over the years from investments coming out of Homecoming. Even that, before this took place, there was this huge bump in venture capital investment into Michigan. It's now the #1 state, fastest growing for VC investment. And I think you see that kind of energy, you see that activity, and you see a lot more entrepreneurs. So the money's coming, right? There's $3 billion alone in funds that are looking to invest in Michigan. We'll see more of that.
That is exciting. Tess, tell me a little bit about why for 8 years you've felt the need to come back and be a part of it.
Well, there's different parts of investment, as he just mentioned. So at the first, I bought a couple dozen properties and then started developing those. And then what happened was I got roped into the culture aspect of it. And so then I sit on several boards in New York City and brought some of those organizations to Detroit. And I just think that the transformation and the reinvention is, and very excited to hear what Ford's doing on the whole mobility side, that each year you find new ways to invest and bring in new partners. And I just think it's, as he said, it's just extremely exciting right now.
Tess, it's funny. Everybody feels great. Most people feel really strongly about their hometown, and I suppose when two people meet and they find that they're both from Denver, that's a. But there's something it's always struck me, and I can say this as someone who's not a native Detroiter. Something's always struck me though about Detroiters and the way that they feel about their hometown and the way that they connect with other Detroiters.
Absolutely. I mean, I work in about 50 countries. I'm out of the country, so COVID really hit me bad.
Sure.
I'm actually going to Europe this week. And I have to tell you, wherever I go and I say I'm from Detroit, everybody wants to talk about Detroit. So it is a very exciting place.
Nicholas, I imagine you feel the same way, and you see it when people come back for this event.
Very much. Look, I think Detroiters are industrious by nature. We like to build things. And so when you get people like that in a room together who are thinking about investment and thinking about business, it's, what can we build next? And when are you coming back, right? Are you going to move? You're coming home. And so, look, I myself, 2 weeks ago, moved back to Detroit for exactly that reason.
Expand on that for me a little bit. What is it that you feel like is the driving energy in the city right now?
Well, first of all, there's great talent, right? You've got to have fantastic people to build an organization. And we've got that here in Detroit, whether it's technical talent, whether it's investors. And so we love seeing that. That energy's there, the downtown core is there. And for my particular business, there's been a lot of investment around cybersecurity. And so for us, that community, that ecosystem is critical. Firms like Duo that was acquired by Cisco, for example, in Ann Arbor, we love to see that. And so we want to be part of that same story.
I use Duo every day, many times a day, so that's been quite a success story. Tess, as you've been coming back now for 8 years, you have watched a lot of what people have seen as marked progress here. It got obviously waylaid a little bit by the pandemic, but where do you feel? How's your sense of what's happening in Detroit right now and sort of where the curve is headed?
I think that's what's so helpful about an organization or an event like Detroit Homecoming, because, I'm only in town 3 times a year at most. Yeah. And so to have that facilitation of them informing us of what to get involved in. And like this past one, years before, I was working with Tanya Allen and the Stillman Foundation and bringing the American Composers Orchestra to Detroit schools. This year, I'm going to be working with Boys and Girls Club, who were highlighted on the last day of the homecoming. And we're going to bring reuse materials for that 13-year-old entrepreneurs in Detroit, and that's I'm really excited about that potential partnership.
That's a thrilling one. It is. Thank you both so much for the time today. I'm so glad you were both a part of it again, and we look forward to next year's edition. Thanks, gang.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for us. Meet the Press coming up next, right after Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Flashpoint.